that's why you get all the way down here.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and tenors. This talk will be the Internet of Personification. So yeah, alright, that title makes absolutely no sense at all. That's fine. Because the theme of this conference is the Internet of Things, so I need at least a tenuous link to that. Because otherwise MPK glares at me. And I do enough things that he glares at me at during work hours, so you know. Okay, so we have this whole thing of lots and lots of things, as in lots of devices. More importantly, we're getting more and more the idea of smart devices. But smart devices is already personification, because we are ascribing intelligence to those devices. Okay, personification is the projection of human attributes onto inanimate objects. As in, well, okay, inanimate in the sense of this is not vegetable or animal. I mean, we do this all the time already. We've been doing this for years. I mean, seriously. As soon as you're swearing at an inanimate object for not obeying your will, this is the level of personification. And you have this interesting situation in robotics that people run into, which is if you make something that reads as close to human but not perfectly human, you fall into what's known as the uncanny valley, where people find it really disturbing because they're kind of half trying to model it as a person-ish emulating thing and half trying to model it as a person. And it really screws with their heads. And I think to an extent that this is where people often run into trouble with Google now. Okay, I know there are a bunch of people who love it dearly. There are also a bunch of people who only ever turn it on by accident. And then it starts popping things up, go, why is the computer suddenly telling me things? Why does it even know this? How did I manage to give Google that data and get seriously creeped out? I mean, this is basically, I suspect, Google's core problem in a lot of things is that don't be evil is all very well, but it would be nice if they could manage don't be creepy too. And it's notable that people don't seem to have the same problem in their relationship with Siri. And I think a part of that is the idea of Google now is just, blur, here's some information. Whereas Siri feels like a fake person that is trying to help you. The other thing that's occurred to me is mobile apps, because you have a tiny screen, because people are trying to use it while they're in the middle of something else. Mobile apps tend to be very much single purpose. So something that I found quite interesting is there's an app called Habit RPG, which some of you may have heard of, where basically you enter in a set of habits that you want to keep to, you invite a bunch of friends, you form a party together, and every time you perform a habit, you check that off. If you check off all of your habits, it does hit points of damage to monsters with leveling up, right? If you fail to perform the habits, your entire party takes damage, and then your friends slap you around the head and remind you next time. But I think the whole sort of idea of interacting with it as there are sort of almost intelligent agents trying to attack you and you then fight them off by is an interesting way of conceptualizing stuff. Because it gives you a personal connection to what you're doing above and beyond what you would normally have when you're just using a device. Which led me to start thinking about, what about, okay, so single purpose things. Agent-based services, we've already got the idea of being able to have semi-autonomous agents doing things for us, which is great. I mean, you know, a monitoring system's alerting setup is effectively a semi-autonomous agent that is there to help you be aware of the fact that somebody just edited code in production and now everything's on fire. Although, admittedly, on one occasion, the way a monitoring system successfully warned us there was a problem was by... it warned us that there was a problem with the sendmail installation on the monitoring server. by filling the disk of the monitoring server with low disk notifications in the mail queue. That was an interesting day. I eventually discovered the person who had set up that server had since left the company. That was probably good for him. Anyway, but you know, things like tell me if type questions. Like the calendar system. You are asking a calendar system to remind you of things. And I don't know about anybody else, but I find it very easy to ignore an automated reminder from a calendar system because it's just a notification, it's just a computer or whatever. If I ask another human being to set a notification in their calendar, at which point when that goes off they remind me human to human, I'm much more likely to actually pay attention to it. This has been known to annoy the living crap out of girlfriends of mine who have Google Calendar setups, but never mind. And the other thing that you can have is the idea of being able to make connections between stuff. So if this then that is kind of a fascinating example of it, albeit, okay, it's a little bit limited and it's a little bit clunky, but it does a lot of things. Yahoo Pipes, on the other hand, is extremely not limited, even more clunky, baroque, and it's run by Yahoo. Nice idea though, but those systems still feel like programming, which is fine for us, I'm sure, but not ideal for everybody else. What I really want is more sort of a butler. I mean, the metaphor I'm looking for here is Jeeves and Wooster.
No, you're looking for a
Batman.
In the idea of something that patiently accepts that I'm completely useless at everything and just from me, yeah, all right, I am looking for MDK. That's not my point. To be more accurate, okay, so sending. This was a service that existed some time ago. It was basically an automated personal assistant. In theory, Dave Wheeler was one of the people involved with it at some point. And you could CC Sandy on emails, and she'd then automatically set up follow-up stuff for it. You could mail her in fairly plain English language to set reminders. And you got replies that it had just enough variations on the automated text generation that it didn't quite feel like a machine. It felt like you were being reminded by a human. Sadly, they had no business model, got acqui-hired and disappeared, as tends to happen with about every online service I actually like. But the whole idea of conversational software is really interesting, especially to those of us who live at a shell prompt wherein we're effectively already having a conversation with the computer, albeit it may largely consist of 4-letter words. I mean, you know, RN minus RF, pretty much the R stands for right and there's a silent now on the end, and I'm sure you can guess what the other letter stands for. But the whole idea of software that feels like it's on your side seems like a really neat concept. Go on, show me. That's the thing. See? Now I'm insulting the computer again. What a surprise. Anyway, brings me back to the whole thing of, okay, everybody knows the old trope of sell benefits, not features. I've got it backwards, well done. However, the point that I'm trying to make is a user is interacting with your app with a view to achieve a goal. The performing an action is actually secondary to it. And it's always worth bearing that in mind. I mean, you know, when we're looking at features on applications, we always talk about the what, the how, and the why. And we have a tendency, being developers, what is the first thing we care about? Because that's the functional specification. How is the implementation? And why kind of gets left to last? And that's kind of unfortunate, because from the point of view of somebody who's not reading the source code, they care about the why they're doing it. They care a bit less about the what, so long as it matches up to the why, and they don't really care how. They just want it to happen and be done. Which leads me to wonder about the idea of, okay, there's the traditional thing of figuring out the what from starting off with a user story, and a good user story starts from the why. Trying to explain this to project managers is sometimes an interesting experience, but it's very important. I sort of wonder whether we might not want to think about, when you're looking at lots of autonomous devices trying to do things, about agent stories, about coming up with the thing of, why is this device wanting to talk to that device in the first place? What's the purpose of this? And figure that out before you actually start writing the code to make them communicate. Because we're rapidly reaching the point where the vast majority of the things that we carry with us can run third-party software of some sort, or at least could be poked by third-party software. So, I mean, the personal is becoming programmable, and I think it's an important thing to try and sort of surface that in a way that actually allows users to get things done. Okay, so programs aren't people, but you can model the execution of a program that is doing things as, you know, in terms of the thing of Google Now is the one. I'm going to go back to this, largely because I keep hearing people complaining about it creeping about. It's never happened to me, but the only reason it's never happened to me is because so far I haven't accidentally turned it on yet. I'm sure I will at some point, because every Android release, there appears to be more ways to accidentally turn it on. Traffic information. The recent one I saw was a friend of mine getting, it was about an hour before he normally leaves work, and Google Now pops up traffic information for his drive home. Now, yeah, that's really useful, but he'd never asked it to do that. What it had done was noticed that he's often driving between work and home. It could tell from the GPS that he was at work, therefore, and that's a laudable goal.
Siri does that. Most people have never seen it, but Siri does that.
Right. Oh, I'm sure Siri does all of this. I'm interested in Google Now because it does it and people get really pissed off, even though it's actually potentially useful. And I think the answer is, what it should be doing is instead of producing a pop-up of, here's traffic information, it should produce a pop-up that says, you seem to regularly be about to make this drive at this time, would you like some traffic information? And if you do that, it's immediately told you what it's making the decision based on, so it's at least somewhat less creepy. And it's making an offer to help, rather than simply going, here's help! And I think that basically giving people a narrative, even in push-based interactions with applications, is liable to bother them a lot less. If you want to cut across to the real life version of whether this is creepy or not, it's the difference between asking a girl if you can buy them a drink and throwing a double vodka at them and running away. Which, if nothing else, is a waste of a perfectly good double vodka. But which is where the whole Jarvis metaphor comes in. If you look at the stuff in the Iron Man films, which is I am talking about that because it's about the only fantasy interface I've ever seen that actually seemed reasonable, in the fact of it's intelligent, useful, tries to be proactively helpful, but still fundamentally does what the user wants, not what it thinks the user wants. And now, okay, gone through all of this, the alternative approach is basically disappearing systems, where the system ends up being transparent to people. I mean, I don't notice Bash. Okay, this is not a good example for non-technical users, but for us, I think it's reasonable. In that my shell environment basically mediates between me and what I'm telling the system to do. And I don't really think about it as even being there. It's just a mode of interaction that ends up having the desired results. The iPod Touch interface, I think, is another great advantage of that, because it's smooth enough that what you're not thinking about, I am interacting with a music player, you're thinking about, I want to listen to X shuffle, oh damn, it's given me my least favourite song first again. But still, the whole point is, well,
Skip.
right. The whole point is the interface becomes something that you're not really paying much attention to. And it becomes basically a direct manipulation metaphor onto reality, which has always been a very powerful thing when you can do it, and the advent of decent touchscreen devices gives us a lot more opportunities to build those metaphors. And I imagine that people who aren't me are actually good at user interface design and keep coming up with interesting ways of doing that I can then steal. We kind of need Twitter bootstrap for the UI ability deprived or something, but anyway. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, as devices become pervasive, they need to either be invisible or they need to come across as friendly. Because if you don't hit either of the two, you are going to fall into the uncanny valley. And you're going to either creep people out, or you're going to annoy them, or you're just going to confuse them. I mean, that's the other reason I keep turning Google Now off. Because I'm convinced that it will just confuse me, because it's going to try and be helpful and go, here's a bunch of information. What? Anyway. But it is theoretically possible to do both. And I think the best example of this I've seen is Nest. Okay, their original product was a smart thermostat. Great idea. And the idea is it actually learns your habits in that anytime you adjust the temperature, it records it, and it tries to pre-adjust the temperature so that you don't need to adjust it in the way that also puts the heating on for the least amount of time. So it saves you interaction time and saves you on fuel bills. And the whole idea of something that adjusts to you, but adjusts to you in a way that's basically invisible, and then overriding it is fiddling with a dial, which gives you the direct manipulation metaphor. So you basically end up not noticing the intelligence is there, except that things gradually just become better in a way, in subtle ways, that indicate that there is something there that is on your side. But the Nest thermostat wasn't the one that really impressed me. The Nest Protect is a fire alarm. The Nest Protect appears to be the only fire alarm in existence that is not going to result in me wanting to murder it. Because it has this lovely feature of all of them are linked, but it gives you a warning before it goes into full alert mode, which I happen to think is really important, because bacon is really important. I like my bacon crispy. I do not, however, like the fact that any time I attempt to make bacon crispy, my fire alarm decides to sing me the song of its people. At which point you end up doing the open all doors, open all windows, wait. I want to eat me bacon butty when it's not loud. The Nest Protect, you can cancel it at a warning stage, right? And the Nest Protect has a camera in it. Now, okay, people go, oh my god, so many terrible things. Yes, but the camera is used, not only will it emit a soft glow if it detects somebody moving, so if you're wandering around in the middle of the night, you can get enough light to not fall over things without having to put the lights on and wake people up. But also, it uses the camera to give you a way of cancelling the warning. Because what you're trying to say is, no, it's fine, yeah? How do you do that? How do you do that to a human who's about to rush over to help you when you don't need help? You go, yeah? The Nest Protect, you do that at the fire alarm and it goes, oh, okay, and cancels. On the assumption that if it's actually on fire, well, if you're waving your arms at all, it's going to be both of them while running around in small circles. Apparently it can tell the difference. I thought that was a beautiful user interface conceit. I think thinking about those things is kind of where we want to go. Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed about the word personification is that people often fail to use it and instead use the term anthropomorphism. This is actually incorrect because anthropomorphism is projection of human attributes onto animals, not inanimate objects. A key example of anthropomorphism as a common mistake would be cats, in that once a sufficient amount of Stockholm syndrome is developed, cat owners tend to forget that cats are not humans. This is incorrect. I will point out for the record that I accept my personal Stockholm syndrome and keep talking wistfully about getting round to getting another cat with the line, "It's been too long since I've shared my home with evil." So, okay, that's not anthropomorphism. And at this point, we go from Stockholm syndrome to maybe demonization. Now, I mean, in the case of cats, it wouldn't have the A and would be absolutely true. And then I wrote this slide, was thinking about a demon process joke. I just suddenly got this mental image. Yeah. If I ever meet Leonard Pottering, I'm going to ask him if he's into hentai. Anyway, so I've also been thinking quite a lot recently about systems automation and the idea of configuration management systems being semi-autonomous agents that are basically supposed to be doing the things in a repeatable and automated fashion that you would otherwise have done yourself. And that leads me to kind of looking at, okay, so Puppet and Chef, if I'm going to personify those, they remind me of Shiva. In the first thing of, they definitely both want to be God over your systems. And the second thing, they definitely have many arms doing many things at once. And the sense of those many arms are creating and destroying, and in the sense of the ineffability of all gods, we're not always sure why. You did not propitiate the elder god, therefore your pseudo-as file is gone. Though, obviously, my least favourite example of this would be VPN systems and Resolve.com. I've got to the point now where my approach to OpenConnect is sudo, vi etc Resolve.com, Control-Z, OpenConnect, bg, fg the vi, wbang the Resolve.com to get rid of the crap it puts in there. I'm totally aware that I could get round to automating this and I didn't have to do that, but it's basically a finger macro at this point, so I don't care. Okay, so Ansible does seem to be significantly more predictable, and I'd categorise Ansible as in the same sort of style of personage as CPAN and CPAN-M, in that basically they're an American footballer. There is a playbook already provided, you give them a playbook, and it charges down the field in the appropriate direction. And anything that gets in the way gets shoulder barged. Now this does get it to the other end, and it does get it to the other end in a fairly predictable way, but it's not exactly smart about things, and if it runs into an obstacle it can't shoulder barge out of the way, it tends to fall over and cut to the commercial break. Okay, some people are bound to be thinking, but Carton. And yes, Carton is very cool, but fundamentally, Carton is just a means to do a live-action replay of the linebacker charge in another system. Which is extremely useful, but still. Whereas, what I want fundamentally is, well, Jarvis, obviously. I like the idea of a configuration management system that operates as an extension of the sysadmin's will, but can actually be given as much or as little intelligence about its decision-making process as you like. So I want a system where I can describe top-level goals to it, and then have it determine what actions need to be taken to make my current deployment achieve those goals. Most importantly, I then want it to let me look at the actions without it doing anything. Because I get so tired, so annoyed with automation systems, where basically your debugging cycle is set off a full build, come back 45 minutes, come back in 45 minutes, see what broke, twiddle that, set off a full build, repeat. It's like developing a large C++ project in 2001. I get tired of this. Also, by the time it's finished breaking, I've usually forgotten what I was doing. So yeah, run after showing. About the only thing that seems to reliably do this is the -n flag to make. And you know, it's like, okay, make got this right however many years ago, why can't everything else do this? So, started thinking, how do I build a system that will solve this? Came up with a metaphor. Basically, okay, I started off as a pure mathematician. What this largely means at this point is that I've forgotten more pure mathematics than most people learn. But the metaphor kind of works, because the idea is you start off with a set of goals, which may have unbound variables, and then you reduce them until you get a solution. So as an example, if you have a web server running on a particular system, your three ways of reducing things are expansion, extrapolation, and elimination, which I am going to explain. So if you have a rule saying web server running on a system means there is some web server type where we have a package of that server type and that package is installed. That's, you can basically map conceptually across that. So the idea is, at this point, it takes the step of expanding the goal, so it takes the existing goal and replaces it, and then the things that were only in the body get assigned their own names, because the idea here is that at each point, the system keeps a full list of all outstanding goals. So you effectively, rather than entering a subroutine, you perform macro expansion. So that at each point you have a complete list of the equations that you're trying to make true. So let's say the valid web server types are Nginx and Apache. At this point, you need to pick a value for server type, which is extrapolation via selection, as in this can potentially have more than one value, but for the moment we're going to select this one, because we know this is a valid possibility. So you've done that, and at this point, obviously, that's now a package of Nginx server package. So this is just a single thing. I'm assuming that we're talking about a distro package index here. So at that point, there's only one possible value, which is whatever your sources.list came up with. So we can simply deduce that the server package is whatever. Then finally, you look at, is this package installed? And assuming it is, that's a simple step of elimination. All you need to do is say, this goal can be eliminated with no other changes based on this condition being true. The condition being it's installed. So that's just gone. So the end result is basically a set of bindings for the three variables. You can potentially have an equation with multiple solutions, in which case I've got code to allow you to get all of them. So if you start off with a set of goals of something like that, that's going to bind once for each server available. The second one will fail on anything that isn't a web server, and therefore it won't return that as a valid result. But you will end up with a sequence of results that say a valid solution to this equation is let server equals web 001 or whatever. So okay, so far so good. What if it isn't installed? This is the point at which we need actions. We need to start doing things to the outside world, like say, actually issue a package installation. doesn't exactly fit into the equation solving model. Because equation solving works against a single static reality, right? And at this point, Prolog basically gives up and goes, you can have extra logical predicates that can affect reality, but that could completely invalidate all of your working so far, and I'm not checking for you, and I think breaks, you get to keep both halves, which it was designed by a bunch of mad French people in the 70s. I'm just glad they gave it a sensible name. Unlike the other thing I looked at, which is a theorem prover system, which is called COQ. That's fantastic to talk about down the pub, honest. Really. So the idea is, in order to maintain the idea that the query is pure functional, you kind of conceptually wrap yourself in almost a monad and imagine a counterfactual reality in which it had already been installed before you started the query. At which point, all you need to do is test to see if the inferences that you've made to get to where you currently are still valid. You basically recheck. So, okay, whether Nginx got installed on that machine, well, Nginx is still a web server, right? And Nginx 1.23d1 is still a package, so the package installed goal is now true. So this is a valid solution, which is basically elimination via action application. So you have that action happening first, and then the selection and deduction steps are still valid, at which point you've got a result of true. Which then means, because the action conceptually happens first, if you run the action, the same program that you used to figure out what to run can now be run in a no actions are allowed mode to tell you whether it's now true. The point of that being, there's going to be a slide later on, but I'm going to say it now, because this is essential. It's, the point of that is, it rechecks its own working. It doesn't trust, just because it ran the install command and that exited 0, that actually did the right thing. It still goes and checks. This is systems. Always double check things. Do not trust the code. Do not trust any of the code. It was written by developers. So I would need a couple more concepts. Hypotheses are basically where you have a complex value and you have to be able to pick one. So you say X is a dictionary. You need the simplest hypothesis that will make that true. So that's an active elimination where we hypothesize that X is an empty hash, right? At which point, we test for the membership, which is basically a key lookup. So at that point, we update the hypothesis to be X is a hash containing foo is 1, and then similarly, you end up with that, at which point, you have a value of X for which all of the goals are true and can return that as a result. Okay. Because that means you adjusted the hypothesis that you made earlier, similarly to the action stuff, you have to check things since, but it's basically the same code. The final thing is, we know how to change the world, but we need to query the world. So the system for doing observations is to basically have a lazy dictionary. So you could have a dictionary called isFile. And when you do the moral equivalent of that, it goes and does a stat on it and returns whether it's a file or not. At which point that information isn't reobserved, because bear in mind, we're working on the principle that any changes to the world happened before we started, so the observation is going to be fine. So that checks state now. Actions alter state, but because obviously we're not running the actions during the solving process, the action is asked to dry run and provide what it believes the new observations will be. So that allows you to do the full -n run through, but still have it recheck when it's run for real. There we go. So a slightly larger example. You build an observable set for the pause index, which pretty much does the moral equivalent of a zgrep on packages.details.gz. And then you have one called meta-info, And that basically takes the tarball path, rips the meta file out of it and throws it into cpan matter. So you then have an on-demand setup index of metadata from the contents of your mirror. And then you define a slightly large expansion rule. So you start off with a distribution and a dictionary of needed distributions. Okay? Dist requirements then pulls the cpan meta info and can deduce the requirements from the dist. And then for each requirement you've got, you pull the dist out of the pause index and then issue a recursive call to yourself. At which point, by the time you finish, need dists ends up being a hash containing all of the dependencies of that particular module, including their dependencies recursively. So if you feed it something like moo, then you end up with a result of strictures, module runtime, double global destruction, pulls in sub-exported, progressive, etc., etc. So having done that, I wrote an observer, which basically just does a -f for a tarball at the path calculated from the name. Nice and easy. And a short action that basically throws up a temp here, runs through an install, and then creates a tarball out of that target directory. Right? So the trick here is, you then tie those as an observer and an action. So a fetch on that hash is check to see if the file's there. But if you try and set the hash to 1, that issues a build action. Okay? Now having done that, take the initial rule and add 1 line to it. Right? And that means the equation will fail unless there is an entry for this dist in have build of. So what that does is goes and checks to see if it already has the tarball, and if not, in order to not cause the solver to fail, it issues an action of, well, we better build it then so that this will be true by the time the query is valid. Right? So the result of running that is basically a list in dependency order of all the things you need to build to be able to have packages of everything already available. And the dependency ordering is implicit in the way the rule works because it recurses into the needed distributions before doing the thing that might issue the build request. All of its dependencies have already had a build request issued already if required. So by the time you get to here, you know you've got the deps, and you can just basically unpack them into an appropriate spot, run the build against it, tar that up, move on to the next one. That rule code, that's pseudocode. I wrote it in a lovely, ugly Perl array refs syntax because I was trying to get this bootstrap. The cpan stuff I've been talking about, I built in 4 hours on a Wednesday afternoon. And at the end of those 4 hours, I told it to run, and much to my surprise, rather than filling its diver, consuming all memory and crashing the development server, it actually built moo and all of its dependencies in order. So, while this is not yet a working cpan client, going to be. Think about it. Binary builds built in simply because of the way the stanzas run. The potential to estimate all dependencies via meta.yml in advance before starting a build. Because the solver rechecks itself, if you issue a configure action and the myMeta gives you an extra dependency, because it resolves before running further actions, it will pick up those extra dependencies and package them up first as well. And the eventual goal here is to basically have something that is equivalent to Carton on steroids with a dry run option and the ability to reuse pre-cached binary builds. So instead of replaying the linebacker making his charge on another system, you just unpack a bunch of tarballs and teleport the linebacker across the line in the first place. And so the code is currently in git.shadowcat.co.uk. I will probably eventually mint an IRC channel for discussing this project separately. But we're going to abuse hash web simple for the moment, for the simple reason it's there and it's where most of the dependencies are discussed anyway. And before anybody asks, yeah, I will put it on GitHub at some point. I just pushed it to a Git remote while I was working. Interacting with the GUI crap is just annoying. Actually, Inky wrote a thing called GitHub, which is a really nice command line client. However, I keep procrastinating on installing it because I've already got Git repositories that work, and I'm a lazy bastard, obviously. But yeah, this is very much...
Isn't there a genusing in the URL? With the DMUI?
Yes, that should be SC pub git. Fail. I did proofread the slides. Apparently I should have proofread them twice. But it's there. The core algorithm, the equation-based stuff, it's not as fast as I'd like, but it works and produces the right answer. And by not as fast as I like, I mean doing a full dependency solve on Moo takes 2 or 3 seconds, and doing a full dependency solve on DBIS class does 6 or 7. Takes 6 or 7, but I can probably halve that. I already have the speed, halved the runtime once by beating CPAN Meta with a shovel until it used an XS-JSON parser instead of JSON PP. So there's plenty of low-hanging fruit there. Code written in 4 hours did not get NYT plot very much, you know? And the bits and pieces towards the client were very much to be a proof of concept, so you know, run them on your own system at your own risk at the moment. But I am going to be actively working on this because, well, fundamentally the solver call works. I have spent about 4 years throwing away prototypes of this thing. I mean, there's arguments that I've spent so long thinking about this problem, coming up with ideas, getting 18 months in, throwing it out, starting again, getting 18 months in, throwing it out, starting again. People keep telling me that the first release should be version 6. But I am going to get somewhere. The reason I'm focusing on a CPAN client first is that is something I can dog food. As soon as it basically works, I'm going to switch over to using it to manage all of my local libs for my development work. Because that way, if there are any user interface problems with it, I'm going to run face first into them. And yeah, let's see where we get. Thank you very much. Currently I have a couple of minutes left, so does anybody have any questions?
Did you say what DX stood for, if you didn't understand?
Oh, I
I'm
did.
thinking of what this is called.
Well, the idea is the core object it has at each step is a derivation indicating what result have I derived so far. So I could theoretically claim that it's called DX because that stands for derive and extrapolate, but the reality is I just wanted a D by DX joke. Is that with or without a K? No, the client in there currently, because it's minimalist and kind of screwed up, is called CDX on the basis of CDX run. I may rename it later if somebody comes up with a better pun than that for now. But yeah. I'm still on. I've been doing conference-driven development for about a solid 6 weeks on this. And as I say, I got the engine to the point where I could try and build a client-like thing on Tuesday, and then managed to build a proof of concept for a client-like thing on Wednesday. So the roadmap currently is blown me. I didn't expect it to actually work by now. So yeah, we'll see where we get.
The first kind of example of this was installing a web server with pretty much non-CPAN stuff. Is that where this is going eventually? Can you be more general than CPAN?
Well, yeah, basically, a CPAN client is, as I say, a really good dog fooding project for me. Especially since it allows me to deal with a lot of complicated and annoying things while being self-contained within my own directory. But the idea here is all of the dependency resolution and figuring out what a valid solution would be stuff is general. What I've done here is basically built what appears to have turned into a semi-domain specific language. Did not plan to do that, it's just I couldn't manage to get everything I wanted in the other way. But the idea here is the only thing it knows about CPAN is that if it creates an object of this class and calls the run method on it, it's supposed to go and make have dist for this true. So all of the logic stuff should generalize fine to package installation, to writing config files and other similar things. I have a slightly insane plan for config files. I know it's slightly insane because it involves INGI modules. But basically, I think I can build a reversible PEGX grammar. So you basically map your config file to a data structure, at which point, because of the way the system's designed, it will poke to change just the bits of the data structure it needs to have the right final configuration. And because the current data structure is actually a deduction from an observation of the current content of the config file, to make a change to the data structure true, you have to serialize the data structure and queue a write config file action. So I'm hoping to get bidirectional config reading and writing that way. In the previous prototype, I successfully did it for config files that consist of one thing per line and screw you if you have anything more complicated. So I believe the approach works, but you know, ask me after I tried to implement that part. But yeah, I want source builds, pre-built binary builds, vendor packages to all be valid ways of resolving a dependency. I also want to be able to build rules that say either emit a straight tarball to unpack into a local lib, or emit a deb, or emit whatever else. I will eventually support RPM, grudgingly. But yeah, the goal is this generalizes to all installation. The interesting part is going to be figuring out how to go from an unpacked CPAN tarball to not just the CPAN dependencies, but the C-level dependencies, and then you throw the resolver at the apt index to pull your -dev packages in as well. Right. I'm betting I can automate that for most of the simple cases. I'll do the maker support. You can do module bloody build.
What's the name for it?
But yeah, this is basically why I've gone towards the figure out something that can handle the algorithm stuff, because the idea then is what types of packages you can deal with, what types of things you can resolve, are just dependent on writing a few lines of code that basically implement an observation or action class. And I have 1 minute left, and I will let me into my fucking desktop. Yeah, well, There you go. But basically, all you end up writing is, the build update is saying, I predict that having been run, you will have a tarball, therefore the value will be 1, and actually running it runs an external disk builder, and then just expires the observation, so it ends up going and checking afterwards. So, but basically, this is going to be a plugin system, and I absolutely intend to provide an easier way of writing this than implementing the entire class. But I've not quite got as far as that point yet. I have a generic observer that just runs a command line script and uses the result, doing that generically for actions before context. I am now officially at the time, and I'm going to go and stand outside and smoke and try not to fall over. So if anybody wants to ask me any more questions, you're welcome to join me there. But otherwise, thank you for listening.